Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
I know she lost a sweet life.
A family's anguish. The father of a young girl struck and killed by a dump truck in Burnaby wants to know why it happened. Also, police say a married couple in their 70s are the victims of a double killing in Abbotsford. Investigators don't yet know if their deaths were targeted or random.
Something has to change, or we're going to see small businesses in this industry going out of business.
Can a bust? Private marijuana retailers in BC claim unfair pricing practices from government-owned stores.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening, I'm Dan Burritt. Thanks for joining us. A young girl who came to Canada from Afghanistan had dreams of being a doctor to support her family. Instead, her family buried her on Monday after she was struck and killed by a dump truck in Burnaby. The CBC's John Hernandez spoke with her father today and has more on his grief and calls for safety.
I know she lost a sweet life.
The days have been a bit quieter inside Litfalla Behzad's home, a stillness since the afternoon his daughter never returned from school.
She was so intelligent, she was so mature.
14-year-old Muska Behzad immigrated to BC with her mother and siblings in 2020, moving to Burnaby to be with her father. She spent her days caring for her younger brothers. When she grew up, she wanted to support her family.
She would think about us, because she say, I really want a good life, for you, like a good future for you. She came up with an idea, so why not? If I can become a doctor, then you see, doctors have a bright and wonderful future here. So she would promise me the papa will be a doctor.
Muska was walking home from school last week when she was struck and killed by a dump truck on this street. Her father heard there was an incident and rushed over to the scene.
Like your mind tells you something, that it could be my daughter, and suddenly the ground was slipping out of my foot, like how hard it is when I heard this news.
The teen was honored by hundreds at a funeral service on Monday, but concerns about the circumstances surrounding her death remain, namely the nearby construction that many deem a safety hazard. In November, another girl was hit by a minivan or truck here. Police have issued well over 100 tickets to commercial vehicle drivers in the area.
This incident, that really described, the life of myself, my family, because that should be like the safety protocol things, why this should happen,
Police are still investigating. The construction company, Leadingham McAllister and Marcon, claims it followed safety requirements. Meanwhile, the city says it's installing temporary sidewalks to make this area safer. As for the family, it simply wants answers.
Someone has to take this responsibility. If someone is not taking the responsibility, I'm sure, God forbids that could happen to someone else as well in future.
Answers that might not ease their heartbreak, but could hopefully keep others safe. John Hernandez, CBC News, Burnaby.
Abbotsford police have released the identity of two homicide victims found dead inside their home on Monday. Police say the victims are Joanne and Arnold de Jong, a married couple in their 70s. They were found in their home in Arcadia Way near Selden Road. Homicide investigators do not yet know if the killings were targeted or random, but police note the attack does pose some risk to the public.
The Abbey PD patrol officers are patrolling the area with a heightened level of awareness. We have a lot of officers in the area, homicide detectives, canvassers, and interviewers. So while there is some risk, there is also increased amount of police presence in the area. To the community, I would say that they're aware of who belongs there, who lives on the street, and what sort of traffic they're used to. If anyone there sees anything unusual or anywhere, they should call the police and report it.
Police say they are still collecting evidence and working to build a timeline leading up to the couple's killing. Anyone with information or video from the area is asked to contact police. A bill to enshrine abortion access in the U.S. failed to pass the American Senate today. Democrats fell short of votes to codify the Women's Health Protection Act, an effort to preempt a potential ruling by the Supreme Court to overturn the landmark Roe v. Wade decision.
3/5 of the senators duly chosen and sworn not having voted in the affirmative. The motion is not agreed to.
The key reason the Democrats rushed it into place was so voters would know which politicians do not support abortion rights ahead of this fall's midterm elections in the U.S. The Supreme Court is expected to issue its ruling on Roe versus Wade this summer. And as our neighbors in the South prepare for the potential fallout, Belle Puri tells us abortion providers and advocates in Washington state, just to the south of us, expect to see a huge increase in demand for abortion services.
If the USA's highest court reverses women's constitutional right to abortion, Washington state supporters of reproductive rights are ready.
Well, I think Washington state has the ability to become a safe haven for a lot of states, a lot of women in other states who are seeking abortion.
Abortion rights supporters predict up to a 400% increase in the number of women who will travel to Washington state for abortion care if the Supreme Court rules as expected. Most will come from Idaho and Montana. In 2019, just over 17,000 abortions were performed in Washington state. 5% were obtained by out-of-state residents.
We are right now training a new provider. We're looking for another one. It takes a while to get them updated and trained, but we are definitely having conversations and monitoring our access.
Abortion clinics here have already noticed interest from women in Texas, where lawmakers have vowed to make abortion unthinkable. Washington, on the other hand, has always been considered a very liberal state.
Washington state was the first state in the country that passed abortion rights by a referendum of the people back in 1970. And repeatedly over the years, anytime there's been an attempt to either roll back abortion rights, they've all failed.
The state's governor promises to keep it that way.
Washington state was a pro-choice state. Washington state is a pro-choice state. And we're going to fight. We are going to fight like hell to keep Washington a pro-choice state. That's why we're here today.
In anticipation of the court ruling, at least 26 states have indicated they will ban abortion. That could impact an estimated 36 million women.
The need is not going to go away. The need for abortions isn't going to go away. This is just going to shift the paradigm of how people go about getting access.
In Washington state, that will mean becoming a refuge for women's health care. Belle Puri, CBC News, Vancouver.
The United Nations issued a third rebuke of BC and Canada's policing of Indigenous anti-pipeline land defenders, a repeated call that members of the Wet'suwet'en and Secwepemc nations say continues to be ignored. A letter penned by the Human Rights Committee on Racial Discrimination cited the RCMP and private security forces as perpetrators of forceful policing. They say the provincial and federal governments escalated their use of force, criminalization, and surveillance. The committee had issued similar rebukes in 2019 and 2020, and now Indigenous anti-pipeline demonstrators are reinforcing demands to halt construction of the Coastal GasLink and Trans Mountain pipelines. Recreational marijuana has been legal in Canada for almost 4 years now. But in BC, many sellers are still finding it very hard to make ends meet. Some private retailers are alleging unfair pricing practices from public government-run stores. And as Joel Ballard reports, they say it's pushing owners out of the market.
Though it took years and cost tens of thousands of dollars, Paul Taylor saw becoming a licensed cannabis retailer as his ticket to retirement after a lifetime of hard work.
As it turns out, I have to double the amount of hours that I'm working and to be able to stay afloat.
Taylor says he can't stay competitive with government-owned BC cannabis stores.
They're selling products at such a low price, we can't compete with that as a mom-and-pop shop.
Retailers like Taylor say deeply discounted pricing at BC cannabis stores is pushing private owners out of the market by offering products with razor-slim margins compared to wholesale costs.
Ultimately, we'll go under.
CBC News reviewed the prices of dozens of products, which showed margins ranging from 25% down to 7%, along with other products at regular margins.
I've heard this from my retailers in Nanaimo. I've heard this from my retailers in Vancouver, in Kamloops. I mean, it is, across the province, a very significant challenge to private licensing.
What should I grab, Robin?
I'd grab go for the gelato.
And the same thing is happening at this shop.
Something has to change, or we're going to see small businesses in this industry going out of business.
Once the majority of private retailers are priced out of the market, he worries prices could rise, and that BC's cannabis industry will lose many of its legacy operators who advocated and helped pave the way for legalization. The liquor distribution branch says it aims for margins between 23 and 25% for its flowers and pre-rolls, but admitted that it too is battling big competition, saying our stores are required to balance the need to be profitable with staying competitive with the illicit market. Richardson suspects they are being subsidized through tax revenue, but the government was quick to shut that idea down.
There are always fluctuations within price, within stores.
Richardson welcomes the competition as long as it's fair.
There should be an equal playing field between all of the competitors in the retail cannabis space, including the government.
He has filed a complaint with the Competition Bureau of Canada. Joel Ballard, CBC News, Vancouver.
A new study suggests long-term exposure to wildfire smoke may increase a person's risk of developing cancer, specifically brain and lung cancers. The research was done by scientists at McGill University who tracked the health of 2 million Canadians over a 20-year period. They found people who live within 50 kilometers of forest fires had a 10% higher rate of developing lung cancer and an almost 5% rate of developing brain tumors compared to people who live further away. The study also found some pollutants can linger in the environment well after the flames have been put out. After being locked out for more than a year, workers at the Hilton Metrotown Hotel appear to be heading back to work. The union representing nearly 170 workers at the hotel says a deal has now been reached. It says the 3-year contract includes wage hikes, protections of benefits, and recall rights for 97 workers fired around March of last year. The union claims this has been the longest hotel strike in lockout, in provincial history. The sexual assault trial of BC-born musician Jacob Hogart continued in Toronto today. An Ottawa woman who alleges Hogart sexually assaulted her in 2016 was questioned again by his legal team. She is one of two complainants in the case. The former frontman of the band Headley has pleaded not guilty to those charges. The CBC's Judy Trinh has the latest and a warning. The story contains graphic details.
One day after the Ottawa woman told the court her account of allegedly being anally, vaginally, and orally raped, Jacob Hogart's voice was heard in court through a recording of a phone call that he had with the complainant. After hearing it, she broke down. This is very traumatizing for me. It's difficult to hear his voice and difficult to see him. I've blocked out so much of what happened so I could survive. Legal analyst Ari Goldkind is watching the proceedings and says there was a significant shift in momentum.
We've certainly seen the reasons that criminal defense lawyers like myself say to Canadians, don't prejudge matters. This is why we have trials, and we don't know everything until the evidence is called in court, and the defense is certainly making very significant inroads on accuser number 2.
The call, which Hogart recorded without her knowing, also contradicts her earlier testimony. She says she only spoke to Hogart once after the alleged rape and that it only lasted 30 seconds. Instead, the conversation lasted 15 minutes. Defense attorney Megan Savard argued, you made up a story about a 30-second phone call with Mr. Hogart that he blocked you because you thought that would help make your story more believable to the jury. No, she replied. You thought about how a rapist would respond to a phone call from you. No, he's the only rapist that I know.
All of a sudden, the defense lawyer produces from her briefcase a 15-minute-long recording where she is clearly trying to set Mr. Hogart up into an admission, into a confession, and the call lasts 15 minutes. That's something that the defense team for Mr. Hogart, whether he testifies or not, will clearly highlight to the jury that this young lady's recall cannot be trusted again. Doesn't mean what she says didn't happen, but for the burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt should give the jury pause.
The woman also testified that she felt some pressure by a CBC reporter to tell her story and be a voice for the Me Too movement, and that after going public, she decided to go to police. Jacob Hogart is facing 2 counts of sexual assault causing bodily harm and 1 count of sexual interference related to a minor. He has pleaded not guilty to all charges. The singer's voice has now been heard in court. It's not yet known if he'll testify in his own defense. Judy Trinh, CBC News, Ottawa.
For the first time, the United States is shining light on how it treated Indigenous children who were forced into schools designed to erase their culture. The parallels are clear with Canada's own shameful legacy of residential schools. But as Katie Simpson shows us, in the U.S., the reckoning with the past is just beginning.
Secretary Deb Haaland is trying to shine a light on a dark place in the country's past, releasing a first-ever report that aims to capture the scope of the trauma inflicted on Indigenous communities in the U.S. as generations of children were forced to attend federally run boarding schools.
The languages, cultures, religions, traditional practices, and even the history of Native communities, all of it was targeted for destruction.
The initial report identifies 408 federally run boarding schools with 53 different burial sites uncovered so far. The full picture is far from clear. This analysis only documents just over 500 deaths, with a warning: the department expects the number of recorded deaths to increase.
Our children deserve to be found. Our children deserve to be brought home.
The U.S. investigation started after what is believed to be hundreds of unmarked graves were discovered at a Canadian residential school in Kamloops, BC. A discovery that moved the first ever Native American cabinet secretary to tears and then action.
I stand on the shoulders of my grandmother and my mother, and the work we will do with the Federal Indian Boarding School Initiative will have a transformational impact on the generations who follow.
Beth Wright is from the same community as Secretary Haaland and is now an attorney for the Native American Rights Fund. She says this is an important step, as it tells a story that is not widely known outside of Indigenous communities in the U.S.
I think it makes me emotional because I was always taught growing up what my responsibility was to my community, and I always knew of the trauma that existed in my own community, but we were always also taught to focus on the strength of our community.
To continue with this work, the department is launching a national tour to meet in person with survivors and collect their stories if they wish to share. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Washington.
If you or someone you know is looking for support, you can reach the National Residential School Crisis Line at 1-866-925-4419. That runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and is available to anyone who's impacted. Avian flu has surfaced again in BC. A small poultry flock in the Comox Valley has now tested positive. Officials have confirmed the flock tested for the highly contagious H5N1 virus. This is the first case of avian flu on Vancouver Island so far. The infected premises has been placed under quarantine, and producers within a 12-kilometer radius have been notified. Owners of small flocks are being urged to be very careful and bring in preventative measures. Now, you may have noticed them for years. Canada's geese are having their way with local parks. Staff in Vancouver, for example, trying to control the bird population, say they're facing an uphill battle, though. Their main weapon against downy invaders is a practice called egg addling. Park board staff sneak up to nests and replace the eggs with others that have not been treated to produce new goslings. Eggs in about 100 nests so far this year have been swapped out, but staff admit it's not enough.
We can easily access most of the nests on public property, but there are many nests that are on private property, on rooftops, balconies, and other places that are difficult to access. So we're really only able to access a small number of nests and really only able to identify a small number of those nests.
The last count in 2016 found at least 3,000 geese in town, but that number has gone up since. The park board is now asking anyone who notices a nest or knows of one to contact them. Here, meanwhile, are some eggs many people are actually happy to see hatch. Stanley Park is welcoming the first heron chicks of the season. Take a look. 13 newly hatched Pacific blue heron chicks have been spotted by the Stanley Park Ecology Society. The heron colony is found in the trees bordering the Stanley Park tennis courts, right near the park board office. There are an estimated 40 eggs in the nest, so more chicks are expected soon. It's been a hard year for the colony, though, with nesting season beginning late due to Extreme weather, likely, and reported eagle raids. Anyone hoping to take a peek at the new chicks can log on to the Stanley Park Heron Cam at vancouver.ca/heron-cam. White Rock has now renamed one of its most prominent waterfront parks. Totem Plaza's new official name is Grand Chief Bernard Robert Charles Memorial Plaza. Charles was a well-respected Semiahmoo First Nation chief from 1963 to 1996. He was also a lawyer who opened one of the first family law offices in Gastown.
He really was a great man. He took care of so many of us in our community. He took care, he shared his knowledge, his understanding with the greater community. He did so much out there in that world. I asked Joanne last night, I did an interview this morning, and I said, I know some of it, but I don't know the law stuff. She sent me pages of accomplishments. And I went, okay, stop, please stop. I said, that's enough.
The plaza was first dedicated to the Grand Chief's memory in 2009. It is the newest addition to Vancouver's downtown, and it is getting rave reviews from the young, the very young, and those young at heart. A new park opened at Smythe and Richards Street about 2 weeks ago and has been attracting curious visitors far and wide. Our Justin McElroy reports on why it works and what the city can learn from it.
It's not like other parks.
I think when everyone saw the plans and designs, people were a little bit surprised and intrigued because really it is unique to our system.
But so far, the new space at Smythe and Richards is proving to be a hit.
We've heard from people, Langley, North Shore, Surrey, who've driven in.
It's attracting plenty of people for its big slide and unique overhead walkway. And unlike most Vancouver parks, it's designed to work well all months of the year.
Natural grass just breaks down, turns to mud, particularly in our winter climate. So we have very durable surfaces here, whether it's the resilient rubber, the pavers, the concrete, or the wood deck that we're on.
It's the start of an aggressive park building strategy in the city, with many scheduled over the next few years, faster than Vancouver has seen in quite some time. And with so many new parks being built in this city, what can the Parks Board learn from this one as it jumps into the great unknown?
I think a lot of our system obviously was designed pretty long ago, and Vancouver's changed so much and so rapidly, and so we have to be responsive to what people need now.
Dumont thinks maybe future parks could have designs that help with water conservation in the same way as Smythe and Richards. And the Park Board knows different parks are in different neighborhoods, each with unique needs.
This park had to function in multiple modes. A daytime mode, we're here just after school, so there's a few kids in the playground. It's going to have an evening mode, so we really spent some time designing the lighting to be just right because we're downtown.
In the coming months, a cafe and artwork will come to Smythe and Richards, along with an Indigenous name for the park. Meanwhile, the Park Board will turn its attention to consultations for new parks across the city, and maybe they'll turn out as good as this. Justin McElroy, CBC News, Vancouver.
That was a long slide.
We're waiting to see this. He promised he was going to do something with that slide. It was just that pause,
delivered.
that infinitesimal, oh, there he is. What a shock. Justin having fun at a park.
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't a bad day for it, sort of.
It was a beautiful day for park adventures. In fact, Dan, I'm pretty pumped to tell my 3-year-old about the aggressive park building strategy. It's going to be music to his ears. We were at a new park ourselves today. The Bridgman Park at Inter River on the North Shore just opened a couple of days. This is going to be the summer of parks. I feel it. So let's see if we can get the forecast. Yes. Take a look at the temperatures today. I'm glad it held off for all park goers alike. As far as the rain, 12 right now at YVR. As I get you through the big picture, I just want to show you how different the other side of the country looks tonight. 18 in Toronto, 23 in Montreal. They're going to see their first big warm up. In fact, hitting the 30s as we head into the end of the week for Montreal and Ottawa. We're not going to get that warm, but I see a bit of a warm up in our long range. Watching tonight, our first weather story, though, which is the approaching showers. This is sort of one more cold, low pressure system that will drop temperatures. So watch for that rain to start as showers in the next hour or so for Metro Vancouver. And it is this cold circulating low that will bring gusty winds tonight, a good 20 to 40 millimeters, and temperatures that will struggle to hit the double digits tomorrow. So be prepared for a chilly, wet, stormy Thursday across the South Coast. You can see the bullseyes of heavier rain, definitely towards the North Shore, up towards Squamish and Whistler. So there's that cold, low pressure system sitting off our coast. More snow yet accumulating for our local snowpack. We're going to really have to watch that as soon as we get into our first warm up above average snowpack continue. Okay, Friday looks like a break day. Saturday and Sunday, it's wet, but this is our first southwesterly system in quite some time, so that will come with warming temperatures. 17 in through Kelowna, 14 for Cranbrook tomorrow. We've got lots of sunshine in through the interior, but rain will move in for Prince Rupert. That's the next system that will be our story for the weekend. So one cool day, we got a break day on Friday, and then warm but wet for the weekend. If you're trying to think of outdoor plans, Saturday, showers before we ramp up to rain on Sunday. Next week is looking to start off closer to seasonal than we have in some time. I see some sun and some showers, and all eyes on the long May weekend. I know for many, that's sort of our first hope of feeling the spring weather, and I do see hints of a warm up. But again, Dan, really hoping it's not dramatic because that will kick off our spring melt in a big way. So I'll keep you posted.
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Joe.
You're welcome.
There are growing concerns Russia's objectives in Ukraine may be expanding. A U.S. intelligence report suggests Russia will also move to take the southern part of the country along the Black Sea and a breakaway region in neighboring Moldova. But as Jessica Gallagher reports, Russia still has to win in eastern Ukraine, and that is proving to be very challenging.
Ukraine says that they are slowly but surely taking back ground from Russia. It's on the outskirts of Kharkiv. It's essentially Ukraine's second largest city, and it is in eastern Ukraine in the Donbass, which is really where Russia has refocused its war. Kharkiv is also one of the most important parts in eastern Ukraine for Russia, because in the south, Russia is, or at least its plan appears to be, to essentially crunch Ukrainian troops from the south if they plan to take, or if they manage to take, Mariupol, one of the hardest hit cities in southeastern Ukraine as well. And troops were reportedly going to come on top of that from the north in Kharkiv and essentially cut off Ukraine in the middle of the country. So the fact that Ukraine has managed to take back some areas outside of Ukraine's second largest city is a big feat. And the fighting in eastern Ukraine has been tenuous for both sides, quite frankly, because Ukraine is having difficulties moving equipment from the west, from places like Poland. It's gotten a lot of arms and heavy weaponry from the west, but it needs to ship that heavy weaponry in order to combat forces in the east. Now, Russia, on the other hand, might have more military power, but it's had a lot of problems with troops. They have repositioned and put a lot more troops, about 100,000 more in the east, surrounding Kharkiv and other places in the Donbass, but they haven't been as quick and successful as they had hoped to be. Another issue for Russia is that Ukraine has essentially built a lot of trenches in that area because pro-Russian separatists have been fighting there since 2014. So this is to Ukraine's advantage, and to Russia's advantage is that they can have a smoother supply line from the east and to Russia, which is next door, which they did not have when they pulled their troops back from the outside of Kyiv. Jessica Gallagher, CBC News, Lviv.
A well-known reporter for the Al Jazeera news organization was shot dead today. She was covering an Israeli raid on the occupied West Bank at the time. The CBC's Tom Perry has the latest from London.
Video has emerged from Jenin on the West Bank where Shireen Abu Akleh was working, and it shows the moments after she was shot. In the video, you can hear gunfire, you can hear shouting, and then you see two figures, both wearing blue helmets and flak jackets with press written across them. One is standing, the other is lying face down on the ground, and that's Abu Akleh. Her employer says she'd been shot in the head. Another journalist was injured as well. Abu Akleh was a veteran reporter. She'd worked for Al Jazeera since 1997. She was well known, well respected in the Arab world, and she was covering Israeli raids in Jenin. Israeli forces have been very active there lately, carrying out regular raids after a surge in deadly Palestinian attacks against Israelis. But Al Jazeera blames Israel for killing its reporter.
We see this as intentional targeting of Al Jazeera and its journalists to prevent them from conducting their duties and reporting to the world what's happening on the ground.
So that's Al Jazeera's take. They say this was a case of blatant murder and cold-blooded assassination. The Israeli military says its troops shot back after they came under what they call massive fire. We have heard from a spokesperson from Israel's foreign ministry.
Israel will be conducting a thorough investigation. We call on the Palestinian Authority to cooperate with this investigation.
The Palestinian Authority is rejecting this idea of a joint inquiry. The head of Reporters Without Borders says there needs to be an independent international investigation. Abu Akleh held American citizenship. The U.S. ambassador to Israel today said he was saddened to hear of her death and that he was encouraging a thorough investigation. And Canada's ambassador to Israel tweeted that she was shocked to hear about Abu Akleh's death, that she welcomed Israel's offer of a joint investigation, and that the safety of journalists must be protected. Tom Perry, CBC News, London.
You can always find our news program online at cbc.ca/BC. Our next local news is right here at 11 o'clock after hockey and the National with yours truly. We'll see you then. Good night.